Hello, good evening and welcome. I'm Karima Brown and you're watching Political Exchange, where we unpack Africa's political economy. Recent developments in East Africa's largest economy, Kenya, involving a face-off between that country's security forces and a terror group linked to Al-Shabaab, who held shoppers ransom in the upmarket Westgate Mall, focused attention on the ability of that government to deal with the security and geopolitical dynamics in Kenya. Many questions remain in the aftermath of the siege, and to help unpack the issues, I'm joined from our Nairobi studios by Aly-Khan Satchu. He's the CEO of Rich Management, and of course in Johannesburg with me in our studios here is Ebrahim Deen. He's a researcher at the Afro Middle East Institute. Gentlemen, thank you so much and welcome to Political Exchange. Ali, let's start with you. The Economist, in the aftermath of the developments, suggested that one of the many casualties in the Nairobi siege is also the credibility of the Kenyan government. Do you agree?
Yes, I do. I think essentially the Kenya government met its BP moment. The whole world's media was camped out on its doorstep. Everyone was fact-checking everything in real time. And I think there was a very unfortunate disconnect, and that was between what the government spokesman was saying and the events that were unfolding on our screens. And even actually Al-Shabaab, who I'd like to call Al-Shabaab 2.0, practically live curated the events at Westgate in real time on social media. And the latency of their rebuttals of the government was very sharp and very on point. And I think it was that which undermined the government's handling of the situation. Outside that immediate reaction and that failure to apply 21st century crisis communication skills in the situation, I think they've recovered some of the situation of late. Mm-hmm. We've had a much clearer narrative. There remain some narratives which we have not been able to connect, but there is an improving picture.
Mm-hmm. Ebrahim, let me bring you in here. Of course, Al-Shabaab, as Ali said, 2.0, taking huge advantage of the media attention and stepping into that vacuum, explaining in very clear terms what the political objectives of that act was, making it clear that Kenyan civilians will carry the cost of the Kenyan Army's activities and presence in Somalia. The advance of social media, of course, also assisting groups such as this. Do you think that this group scored a political and psychological victory over the Kenyan government by being able to so directly and so clearly communicate what its political objectives were?
I think it's, specifically with regards to the narrative, it has, had scored a political victory. And but looking at the aftermath, we've seen Kenyans actually coming closer together rather than Kenyans specifically questioning, Kenya's forces or deployment of forces in Somalia. So we're seeing that in actual fact, Al-Shabaab may have scored a victory and may have gained amongst its constituency and may have reappealed to its constituency, specifically because Al-Shabaab currently is in the process of fragmentation. But in terms of international opinion and world opinion and Kenyan politics in Kenyan society, we've actually seen that animosity towards the group have increased, and no real questions have been raised around whether or not the government would reconsider its troop deployment in the country.
Mm-hmm. Ali, the question around whether acts such as the siege in Westgate Mall and of course the earlier Mombasa bombings, the question that brings to mind is, of course, the kind of risk associated with investment in Kenya. You operate within that community. What has been the business community's reaction to what happened in a fairly upmarket, to probably one of the most upmarket, retail spaces in Nairobi? Are people afraid to be in Nairobi? Are business people looking elsewhere to take their business?
So the first thing, obviously, we've had a number of incidents, but they've been very remote from the capital. Westgate Mall epitomizes the new emerging middle class culture.
Indeed.
And therefore most people who lived in Nairobi would have passed through that mall for a coffee, an art cafe, in order to use the free Wi-Fi, to watch a movie, to take the kids out for a meal. So therefore it had a centrality to the Nairobi urban experience that nothing else previously had. And it therefore has touched, this group of people very, very deeply. I think, when I looked around, it seemed people are prepared to be resilient. I think, it's going to dampen down spirits for a little while, but I expect the malls to be full in a couple of weeks' time. So I don't see it as I think if this is a one-time event, that the markets and Nairobi can handle it. The issue is around the recurrence risk. And I think if we see a similar event again in the next 12 months, the markets will be much less sanguine. The markets have responded extremely powerfully. The Nairobi All Shares up more than 5% since Westgate, has hit a record high on 4 consecutive sessions. The shilling is now at a 4-month high. We've had a breathtaking response in the markets. I don't think they'll be so sanguine if we have a similar recurrence.
Of course, the ability of a recurrence depends very much on the Kenyan government's actions, its readiness, its ability of its intelligence operatives to see events such as Westgate coming. Many people will argue that the events flat-footed the Kenyan security forces, and the ability to repel attacks or to prevent it from happening is, of course, something that hinges very much on Kenya's ability to deal comprehensively with terror. Ali, from where you're sitting, are they in a position to, in fact, be one step ahead of groups such as Al-Shabaab, or are they going to be caught napping again?
Well, there were very many warnings. If you go back, I think the intelligence services, who are getting quite a bad press, have leaked out that they warned about, on 4 occasions, they put out situation reports which are eerie in their accuracy. Now we know what actually happened. So I actually think the intelligence services are actually ahead of the curve, pretty sharp. But I think what Kenya has is a very soft underbelly. That's at border points. Basically, I think, with very little money, you can pay your way through the border. And I think there's this issue around corruption. And, let's not mince words about it. The weak point of the Kenya police and intelligence services is corruption. And until that's resolved, I think, it's going to remain weak and open to asymmetric attacks of this nature. I appreciate you can never 100% safeguard yourself against asymmetric attack, but the weak point for Kenya, I'm afraid, is the fact that money pays, and you can pick your points and come through the wire if you pick your points properly.
Mm-hmm. Ebrahim, is it simply a question of groups such as Al-Shabaab rolling out the cash and being able to bribe corrupt police officials, intelligence officials, or is there a deeper political resonance with the message of Al-Shabaab among the Kenyan population? Is that why you could have the kind of well-planned attack in a mall that routinely checks for weapons, for bombs, very trained and able people going in there? Surely they had assistance. Did that assistance come because the political message of Al-Shabaab resonates among sufficient Kenyans?
We need to basically the political message of Al-Shabaab does have resonance with certain segments within Kenyan society, and this is mainly because many as a result of colonization, many of the borderline provinces, the northern frontier district was actually previously Somali territory. And ever since it had been incorporated into Somalia, many ethnic Somalis do feel disillusioned, specifically as a result of some discrimination. Hassan Yusuf, who's basically the Eastleigh MP to the Kenyan Parliament, said that they've reported 11 instances, of discrimination or bombings in Somali areas within Kenya, and yet thus far they've got no response from the Kenyan authorities, which shows that they are becoming disillusioned, and disillusionment would necessarily lead to some sympathetic feelings towards some of the messages emanating from Al-Shabaab.
Ali, do you think that Kenyans are receptive to the political message of Al-Shabaab, given the kind of issues around Kenya's participation in the kind of war on terror, the actions in Somalia, and then of course the disputes around borders, particularly in those provinces that Ebrahim has mentioned? Is there space for Al-Shabaab and their political message within the political landscape of Kenya?
So I think definitely it resonates with certain communities, particularly along the Swahili coast, which is a majority Muslim area, where the people feel terribly disenfranchised, where there has been practically a targeted assassination policy, and people just feel that they have, that they are sitting on the sidelines, the periphery of the Kenyan story. And I think, this is fertile ground for the Al-Shabaab, and it has proven so. And you only have to see that in the connection between the Al-Hijra and the Al-Shabaab. Al-Hijra is a local domestic organization which seems to be funneling Kenyans into the Al-Shabaab's hands. I think the other point, 2 points I'd like to make are the following. I think Al-Shabaab is no longer purely appealing to Kenya or Mogadishu. If you read the tweets, it is very, very Western facing. I think it's also appealing to the diaspora communities in the West. And this completely changes the dynamics and the calculus around the Al-Shabaab risk. And then finally, I would just add that, with respect to Kenya, I think this whole counter-terrorism thing, putting Uhuru Kenyatta at the front line of the global war on terror, changes the geopolitical dynamics for the government of Uhuru Kenyatta in a very, very interesting manner. It brings President Obama much closer than he might have been even when he visited Tanzania. And I think it completely changes the political trajectory for the government in a geopolitical sense.
Of course, the big question around the response of the international community is the extent to which they will interface with Uhuru Kenyatta, given the fact that he stands indicted before the International Criminal Court. But that is an issue that we will explore after the break. We're going to a short break now, but when we return, we will continue our conversation with Aly-Khan Satchu and Ebrahim Deen.